Yo guys, what is up? Here we are with another reading video. But before we get started, I want to talk about a few things. So, I am back. Florence has hit my area of North Carolina. My house did make it okay, and thankfully most of my neighborhood did. But not all of my county did, Pender County. So, please, if you can, please donate money or help some way because there's a lot of stuff that will have to be done. But I also want to thank all of the wonderful people that helped me and my family get through and be safe. So that's all of that. But I don't have school for the next 2 weeks, so I will be recording a lot of videos, and I'll put out 3 videos. Hopefully put out 2 videos today, tomorrow. I'm recording this on a Sunday. So today, tomorrow, and then I'll start doing it every week. I'll start scheduling them for every week so that when I have soccer games and everything, I can just know that there's going to be a video right out there for you guys to watch. So, I think without further ado, we shall get into chapter 15. And remember, in case you have not watched the last chapter, please do so. It will be at the end screen, so make sure to hang around. And I will see you guys. No, I'm not leaving. Not leaving. Yeah. Okay. So without further ado, let's get into chapter 15. Chapter 15, The Only Thing to Fear. Before Bastian returned home, the two of them agreed to meet the next day to discuss their plans. Sarah still couldn't quite wrap her head around the idea of working with Bastian, even if it was on the Alliance's behalf. But this was a chance for both of them to do something. This was their chance to fight back, and Zara could certainly wrap her head around that. After Bastian left, Zara hurried to her uncle's bedroom, the images of Camp Hammerstein flickering through her thoughts again. The bombs, the screams. She hoped Garrison and Farragut had escaped. There was no guarantee that they had fallen at Camp Hammerstein. Excuse me. But doubt rolled through Zara anyway, like a Nazi tank. She had seen the explosions. It would have been nearly impossible to outrun one of those. Hopelessness sank into the pit of her stomach. It had taken years for the Alliance to bounce back from Mission Metzger. How long would it take for them to recover from this one? Finally, at nearly 10 o'clock, Uncle Red stirred. "Sarah," he rasped. She sprang up toward him, resting her hand against his head. Some of the color returned to his cheeks, and his forehead now felt cool to the touch. But he still looked so weak. "How are you feeling?" "Good as new," he croaked, giving her a half-smile. "Sleeping has helped. Are you thirsty?" She stood to fetch him some water, but his fingers curled around her wrist. "What's wrong? You're as pale as a sheet." Zara didn't want to burden him with the broadcast, not when he was recovering, but the story spilled out of her anyway. She told him about the broadcast, the bombers, and Uncle Red let out a long breath. "I guess you were right," she choked out. "They weren't ready for the mission, and now everyone is gone." "We don't know that for certain. The Alliance may not have used all their forces." "You didn't see it, Uncle Red. Garrison—" She could barely finish his name. "Let's hope for the best. Garrison is more resourceful than you think." Uncle Red scooted off his bed, wobbling on his feet before he righted himself. He waved off Zara's protest for him to lie back down. "There might be something on TV. I don't want to listen to what the Nazis have to say." She took him by the elbow, steadying him, wishing she hadn't told him about the broadcast. "And you really need to get back to bed. And we need to know about the fallout of the attack. I hate to say that, but we do." He twiddled with the television knobs to find the news station. Then he took a seat on the windowsill until a commercial about skin whitening cream ended. "We now bring breaking news from Camp Hammerstein," said the newscaster. "A group of terrorists known as the Revolutionary Alliance brutally attacked the camp in 1900 hours. Over 100 soldiers were killed, but forces from nearby Fort Willem destroyed the rebels with superior air and ground power. All Alliance survivors will be justly executed if found guilty by the SS." "Justly," Zara said, but Uncle Red placed a finger over his lips, shushing her. In a press release from New Berlin, Richmond Balder denounced the raid as inexcusable and then lauded the Nazi forces who struck back against the rebels. A heightened security warning has been put into place across the Eastern American territories. The following parameters will come to pass immediately. Random checks will be performed at the discretion of local Nazi officials. If you have any information about the rebels, contact your local Nazi office immediately, and you will be eligible for a reward. Lastly, persons suspected of treasonous activities will be imprisoned, and if found guilty, these persons will be executed and their families will be taken to labor camps. Once the newscaster moved on to a story about a failed coup to overthrow Mussolini III, Uncle Red turned off the television, but Zara blinked at the empty screen. They're going to imprison family members too? Even children, she said. Fuming, Balder was want to stop out the rebellion before it gains any more ground, like he hasn't done enough already. Zara waited for her uncle to begin a diatribe about how the alliance should have been more cautious, if they hadn't been ready, but Uncle Red surprised her with what he said next. We'll see what happens. The alliance may not be as damaged as the news makes it out to be, and it's clear by the Nazis' reaction that they didn't expect the attack, and they're angry at getting caught off guard. Zara wondered why he was being so optimistic. Maybe he wanted to put on a brave face for her sake, which somehow made her feel worse. Did you try to control your new ability? Uncle Red asked, changing the subject. I'm sorry I couldn't be of much help, he coughed, still looking worn out from the accident yesterday, and Zara felt a tug of guilt. She was about to tell him the way that she was making headway on her lightning, the one bright point of her day, but her answer was interrupted by a rapid-fire knock on the door. Her head whipped around towards the sound, wondering if Bastian had returned, but he had to be smart enough not to use the front door at this hour. They headed downstairs, with Uncle Red shuffling slowly, and they nearly reached the bottom when the front door flew open, was kicked, to be more precise. A trio of Nazi soldiers flooded into the house. 2 armed guards, along with Sentinel Akin, and they were followed by Colonel Eckhart. Zara's breath locked in her throat as she met the colonel's hard eyes, so different from his son's. Uncle Red stepped into the front entrance. Colonel Eckhart, he said stiffly, what's the meaning of this? Sentinel Akin lunged toward him and slapped Uncle Red with the back of his hand. You dare address the colonel in that tone! Uncle Red stumbled back from the blow, and Zara tried to brace him, but she stumbled with her rolled ankle. The soldiers laughed at the bagel. You can search the house, said Uncle Red, rubbing the spot where the sentinel had struck him. We don't have anything to hide. Oh, is that so? Colonel Eckhart cocked his head, amused. His mouth tightened with a sly smile. Perhaps you don't have anything to hide here, but we received an anonymous tip that recently puts you at Fort Goring. It appears you have a penchant for strolling around my fort, along with an accomplice. Garrison, Zara thought. She tried to step forward and ask who the anonymous tipper could be, but Zara held her back. Dread filled her stomach at the glee in the colonel's eyes. Her uncle had always been so careful on missions, and maybe someone had spotted him in garrison while they surveyed the fort. I don't know what you're talking about, Mean-her, said Uncle Red. His voice was steady, but Zara saw the quivering in his hands. Now it was the Colonel Eckhart's turn to strike him, straight across the cheek. Tsk, tsk. We've questioned our witness thoroughly. Uncle Red's eyes flared wide, but his face remained placid. And who is this witness, sir? I won't reveal that, the Colonel grinned. That would defeat the purpose of an anonymous tip, wouldn't it? Now then, where is the man who was with you, Your accomplice? Zara went still. She had no idea if Colonel Eckhart was bluffing or if this witness was indeed real. But it didn't matter now. The Colonel's hackles were raised, and he held all of the cards. Her gaze shot toward her uncle, wondering what they should do. But he kept his eyes straight on Colonel Eckhart's. As I said, I don't know what you're talking about, said Uncle Red. You will not lie to me, the Colonel burst out and launched a fist into Uncle Red's gut. Uncle Red doubled over, gasping from the pain. Zara reached out to help him, but he pushed her away, shaking his head. Stay out of this, he groaned. Please. Uncle Red, Zara started, but the Colonel interrupted her. Arrest them! Colonel Eckhart nodded his guards, who leapt into motion at his command. Sentinel Akin seized Zara by the arm, restraining her while the other soldiers cuffed Uncle Red's wrist. Frantically, Zara struggled against the sentinel's loathsome hands. but it was no use. "Don't you touch her!" Uncle Red shouted, but he was silenced when a soldier punched him in the jaw, then kneed him in the stomach. "Stop it!" Zara cried. Heat swirled on her palms as anger surged inside her. The air changed around her hands, but she fought the hungry urge to let loose her lightning at the guards. She could electrocute them all, her uncle included. General Akin leaned down to her ear and said, "Careful, Mischling. I'd enjoy shooting you." His right hand roamed up from her hip toward her rib cage, then higher still. Disgust coursed through Zara, but she couldn't use her powers and she couldn't twist free from his grasp. As his hand climbed upward, she pulled her head back and spat right in the sentinel's face. Cruel fury twisted his features, but before he could react, one of the other soldiers was stepping forward, swinging his gun at Zara in a wide arc. Crack! The first strike smashed into Zara's head, spattering blood from her nose. Crack! The second hit underneath her chin. She crashed onto the floor. "Zara!" she heard her uncle scream, but his voice was so racked with pain that she almost forgot her own. "Zara!" As blood dripped into her eyes, she clenched her hands into a fist. Desperation took over. If she didn't use her powers, the Nazi would kill her anyway. The air swirled around her fingertips, but then the last smite struck her in the forehead. Crack! "We're done here," said the colonel. "Clear out." It was the last thing she heard before sinking into darkness. Zara opened her aching eyelids, only to shut them a second later. Her head hammered from the slightest movements, and her nose throbbed with a stabbing pain that made her want to retch. She breathed in and out until the nausea finally retreated, forcing her eyes to open. She found herself lying on a bare mattress. Her clothes, a bloody shirt, and her work trousers, were damp with sweat. Her fingers pried at her sticky collar while her gaze traveled to the foot of the bed, where sunlight leaked through a barred window. The place was hot as a womb. Blinking slowly, she saw 8 cots spread on both sides of the bleak room, 4 on one side and 4 on the other. It was a cramped rectangle of space, barely large enough to fit 5 patients, much less 8. Zara's eyes trained on the 2 beds opposite from hers that were occupied by both with unconscious women, both of them black. The rest of the cots were empty. "You're awake," someone said, crouching next to her. Zara looked up to find a familiar face. "Christy," she said. A million questions sprang onto her tongue, but only one word came out. "Where?" "We're in the old hospital at Fort Goring." It took her a moment to put together what Christy was talking about. "They put us here, in the mental ward, for the locked doors." Zara nodded towards the thick door behind them, dread in her eyes. "Do you remember what happened?" Zara closed her eyes and a memory came to her. The colonel busting into her house and arresting her and Uncle Red. Excuse me. Fists clenched. Despite the roaring in her head, she hoisted herself onto her elbows, fists clenched. "Where's my uncle? He's probably at the prison like everyone else. The Nazis arrested so many people that they dumped the woman and the elderly in this waste of a building." She scowled at the rotting walls and water-stained ceiling that let a steady drip of stinking water, most likely sewage. "You were delirious when they brought you here." "I was?" "You kept muttering about going to New Berlin." Seconds passed before Zara stitched together what Christy was talking about. The mission to storm New Berlin. The last part of the Alliance's plan. She had never meant to say it aloud, and never in front of Christy. "Like you said, I was delirious," Zara said, hoping Christy wouldn't prod any further. Not that it mattered. If both Garrison and Farragut had been killed, there wouldn't be an attack on Fort Goring, much less the rest of the Operation Burning Eagle. She sank back against her thin pillow, no thicker than her fingertip. Her nose stung, pounding every time she moved, and a deep anguish sank into her stomach. She could handle the pain, but she couldn't handle not knowing what had happened to her uncle. Had the Nazis hurt him? Had they killed him? "I have to find my uncle," Zara said frantically. Dizziness shrouded her eyes, and she tried to blink it away. She had to get both Uncle Red and herself out of this place. "Didn't you notice the bars on the windows?" Christy said with a joyless laugh. "And believe me, my mom and I tried to pick the lock on that door yesterday." "We're not getting out of here." "Yesterday? How long have we been here?" "Almost 2 days." 2 days? Zara realized that she had been unconscious for 48 hours. And that meant that her uncle had been withering in a jail cell for just as long. Or worse, he could have been declared guilty and shot already. She had to get out of this room, but how? Her gaze flew towards the locked door and the barred windows, then at the wounded women across from her. The Nazis had taken everything she had, and there was nothing she could do. Every inch of her yearned to tear the colonel apart with their lightning and destroy his fort with the wind at her fingertips. But every time Zara tried to sit up, a wrenching agony twisted inside her skull, leaving her breathless. Just stay still, Christy huffed. We're not getting out of here. Zara shut her eyes, wanting to be left alone. Why are you even talking to me? Christy stiffened. Like you think you'd be my first choice? Like there are so many other options? Zara sighed and glanced at the occupied cots. Who are they, anyway? One of the women shivered, while the other didn't move a finger. Makeshift bandages, stained with blood, covered their foreheads. No doubt they were victims of Colonel Eckert's rampage through the city. I don't know their names. I think they threw a few punches when the Nazis arrested them. They weren't killed for that? Christie's lips pursed. It doesn't matter. They're as good as dead anyway. That woman had her ribs crushed. She glanced out the window, and Zara noticed that purple bruises that hard to say. Purple bruises that climbed from Christie's chin to her eye. There were seven of us at first. They took one of the girls away for interrogation, and she never came back. Then they moved another woman into a different cell. There's 5 of us now? So there's 5 of us now? Christie's gaze skittered across the floor, but not before Zara saw the tremble in her eyes. No, 4. My mom tried to break us out, but it didn't work. They took her to solitary confinement. She chewed on her fingernail and headed back to her cot, but not before adding, There's water by the door. Mustering every last bit of strength, Zara dragged herself towards the lone bucket planted next to the room's entrance. Her right ankle felt stiff, and it still bore an angry bruise, but the pain was nothing compared to the throbbing in her head. By the time she reached the water, sweat had poured down Zara's shirt, but she had brought the bucket to her lips, drinking it in great gulps. The lukewarm water soothed her parched throat. You should thank your Nazi fling for that, Christy said, glancing up from her bed. The fear that Zara had seen on Christy's face only a minute earlier had been wiped clean. Zara wiped her mouth from her hand. Fling? The colonel's son. He and a bunch of cadets dropped off that water. Something about the Nazis' Women Charity League. Zara almost dropped the bucket. Frau Eckhart used to run the Nazi Women's Charity League. Was Bastian behind this idea of giving water to the prisoners? If his father had found out about this, Bastian never should have stepped foot in this hospital. But her heart warmed, her first flicker of hope, at what he had done, at what he had risked. What did he say? The guards wouldn't let him say anything. I guess they didn't want your fling to catch any of our diseases. He isn't my... Zara set the bucket down hard. He isn't my fling. Is he more than that, then? He's not my anything, Zara snapped, which she regretted immediately, because that made her head hurt. I've seen how he looks at you at school. The accusations kept pouring from Christie's lips, and Zara had enough. We're locked inside this room, and that's all you can think about? Boots pounded against the door. Shut up in there, a soldier shouted at them. Quiet. Christy stormed towards the windows while Zara flipped onto her side, ignoring the sharp ache that shook through her body every time she moved. Still, the pain was worth it. At least she wouldn't have to look at Christy anymore. Curling into a tight ball, Zara waited for her headache to lessen, but the throbbing refused to go away, along with her question. Was Uncle Red all right? Where had the Nazis taken him? Worry chewed at her heart, making her stomach turn all over again. A tear slid out of Zara's eyes, followed by another. The Nazis had bombed the Alliance, and they had taken her uncle away. She wished she could talk to them, or Miss Tally, or her mother. But her mother was dead. Miss Tally was too. And maybe her uncle as well. Zara buried her face against the mattress, huddling against a burlap blanket. It was the only thing she had, this scratchy scrap of cloth. She knew she could get up and figure out a way to break out of this room, but she pulled her knees against her chest instead, utterly spent. Hopelessness drifted through her. This was all too much. The Nazis, her rest the stifling hot room. But when sleep finally came to her, Zara succumbed to the darkness, not sure if she ever wanted to wake again. And that is the end of Chapter 15, The Only Thing to Fear, by Caroline Tong Richmond. I hope you enjoyed this chapter, and please make sure you come back for the next chapter, which should be probably next week, maybe on Thursday, the first Thursday of October. That could be another chance when it would come, or maybe even, Thursday probably would be more likely. Thank you for listening. Make sure to like, if you like the video, please like down below, subscribe, and comment. And that's about it. I'll see you guys later.